Jumanji, a strange name for a game. Or is it even a game at all? After watching the 1995 movie Jumanji, many questions remain unanswered. Why was the ending of the film changed? Why was the scene with Judy and Peter's memories deleted? Who created the board? Why can only children hear the sound of the drums? Is it possible to die while playing? What exactly happened in 1869? Why did Caleb and Benjamin Sproul hide Jumanji by burying it underground? Couldn't they just burn the game? Or maybe it can't be destroyed at all? That's far too many questions for just one movie. In Jumanji, there's only the rule of the game, while the entire backstory of the board itself was left off-screen. I think it's time to fix that. My name is Evgeny, and this is our breakdown of the 1995 film Jumanji. I promise it's going to be interesting. Let's begin. Hello guys, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who supported the video The Ninth Gate. It's gotten an incredible number of views, and I'm truly thrilled that so many of you enjoyed it. A special thanks to everyone who's been sending donations and joining as channel members. Honestly, I didn't expect so many people to respond. Even a single dollar might not seem like much, but for me as a creator, it's a huge motivation, and it means the world. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which movie would you like me to break down next? Drop your suggestions in the comments. I read them all and will keep working hard to surprise you with new stories. Thank you so much for being here with me. So, I think we should start with the origin story of Jumanji. The game was created in 1868 on the African continent in Sierra Leone. At first, Jumanji had nothing to do with magic or any supernatural forces. It was an ordinary board game crafted by a loving father for his children. The chief of a local tribe, Alkali, using mahogany wood and all his skill, brought a child's idea to life. The folding board was decorated with natural dyes traditionally used by African artisans of that time. On the outer surface, it featured delicate carvings. At the center, there was an image of dense jungle and a mysterious city filled with gold. Along the edges were animals, a monkey, an elephant, a rhinoceros, and an eagle. Inside the board were dice, riddle cards, and 4 playing pieces. Each token was made from a unique material. The elephant from blackwood, the rhino from ivory, the monkey from green quartz, and the crocodile from malachite. The maximum number of players was 4, the father, the mother, and their 2 sons. This way, the whole family could take turns rolling the dice and solving the riddles written on the cards. In total, there were 126 cards, each containing its own riddle. To win the game, a player had to give the correct answer to the riddle. Only then would their token be able to travel the dangerous path through the jungle, at the center of which stood a mythical city made entirely of gold. On the board, this city was represented by a golden plate. In the first version of Jumanji, there was no iconic green stone with the glowing text, and there were no inscriptions in English. All of that appeared later, after British soldiers arrived in the village. You see, since 1808, Sierra Leone had been an official British colony. The local people often suffered from looting raids carried out by the soldiers, and the village where the game was born was no exception. In 1868, the settlement where Jumanji was created was attacked by troops led by a ruthless officer named Pelt. During the raid, most of the villagers were killed. The children, the women, and all the valuables were stolen. The gems, the gold, even the golden plate from the board itself. All of this happened before the eyes of the game's creator, the chief, Alkali. Desperate and realizing that nothing could save his family, Alkali decided to take a drastic step. He turned to an ancient sorcery known as the Nkuba ritual, a dark practice that allowed a soul to be bound to an object. The chief grabbed a handful of the riddle cards and threw them into the fire. In that very moment, from the flames, the Jumanji we know today was born. Everyone who was nearby was pulled into the game, both the villagers and the British soldiers. Their souls became eternal prisoners of the board's world. At the center of the playing field appeared the green stone known as Nyama Kora, the heart of Jumanji. Within it, Alkali and his family were able to reunite, preserving their lives even if it was in a different, otherworldly dimension. That was how the board gained its power. It became not just a game, but an eternal prison. A trial for anyone brave or foolish enough to roll the dice. Later, a young missionary named Robert Sproul arrived in the village. He noticed that at the site where the settlement once stood, there was nothing left except for one strange object. Robert brought the discovery to Mike, his friend and partner in their research mission. He told him that the village they had been studying had mysteriously vanished, and all he could find there was this wooden board. Mike decided to examine the object, and without realizing it, the two friends began the game. But luck was not on their side. The missionaries drew some of the most dangerous challenges: the supreme beast of the jungle and the poisonous vine. In their battle with the supernatural forces, Robert and Mike were killed, becoming the very first victims of Jumanji. A year later, in 1869, a package arrived from Africa to the American town of Brantford, New Hampshire. It contained the personal belongings of Robert Sproul. His two sons, Caleb and Benjamin, unaware of the dark secret behind their father's possessions, immediately began unpacking the trunk. Of course, the strange wooden board caught their attention. After reading the rules, Caleb and Benjamin, together with their mother Lisa, decided to play. With each new roll of the dice, things grew worse and worse. Before their very eyes, monstrous creatures began to break through from the game into the real world. Wild animals, giant spiders, and deadly carnivorous plants. The last to appear was the hunter, Van Pelt. To the family's horror, in his face they recognized Robert Sproul, their father and husband, but he no longer remembered who he once was. Jumanji had consumed his soul and turned him into one of its challenges. At one point, Caleb tried to destroy the board, but soon discovered it was impossible. The cursed game was immune to any physical damage. In the end, the younger brother Benjamin was lucky enough to reach the finish line. By saying just one word, Jumanji, the family's torment came to an immediate end. Everything was reset to the starting point, back to the moment when Benjamin and Caleb first discovered the game. After all they had been through, the brothers decided to free themselves from the curse. They hid the board inside a trunk, took it deep into the forest at night, and buried it as far down as they could. And as for what happened next, well, you already know that part of the story. So what does this whole backstory give us? First of all, we now know who created the game, how it traveled to America, how the board gained its magical powers, and more. But there are still lingering mysteries. Is it even possible to destroy Jumanji? Why can only children hear that strange sound of the drums? How many challenges exist in the game in total? And most importantly, is it possible to die inside Jumanji? Let's start with the simplest question, the rules and the sound of the drums. And as you already know, it can be heard only by children. There's a reason for that. It's how the game lures in new players. Jumanji was originally created for children, for the two sons of a loving father. That's why only kids can hear the sound of the drums. In Africa, drums were often used as a way to communicate between villages. Their sound could carry for many miles. One village could use them to send a message to another. For example, to announce a tragedy like the death of a chief, or on the contrary, to celebrate joyful news such as the birth of a long-awaited child. But this particular rhythm was often used in rituals. Its relentless, pulsing beat was believed to open a doorway to another world. In our case, it serves to draw new players in. On top of that, the board itself is able to sense when a child is nearby. You could say that Jumanji has a consciousness of its own, though nothing like a human one. The board was created with a single purpose: to be played. When the green stone, Nyamakora, appeared at the center of Jumanji, the game absorbed not only the souls of people, but also the very rules that were once written on the cards. On the very first card were written the core laws of the game, the very essence of Jumanji, the main rule: you must play until the end, no matter what it costs. This phrase was carved right onto the folding doors of the board, and everything was written in English. There's nothing surprising about that. Sierra Leone was a British colony, and starting from 1808, schools were built there where English was taught. Most of the local population continued to speak their native languages: Mende, Temne, Loko, Limba, and others. But when it came to reading and writing, they used English. That's why the rules and the challenges of the game ended up written in that language. As for the challenges themselves, most of them came directly from the original cards, meaning there were around 126 in total. But for obvious reasons, the movie showed us only 13 of them. which is about 12% of the full list. I won't go through all of them here, but as you might guess, they mostly included Africa's most dangerous animals: snakes, scorpions, giant eagles, hyenas, and more. They were complemented by natural disasters and catastrophic events: sandstorms, volcanic eruptions, tornadoes, droughts, and even swarms of locusts. There are also a couple of interesting challenges. For example, one where a player's piece is sent all the way back to the starting point, or another where the player's next turn is skipped and passed on to the opponent. But there is one challenge that appeared only after Jumanji gained its supernatural power. Of course, I'm talking about the hunter, Van Pelt. He always appears in the form of a strict father figure, even if dressed in an old-fashioned hunter's outfit that looks absurd by today's standards. Here, it's important to highlight one of Jumanji's most unique abilities. The game uses the player's imagination to materialize its challenges. Remember, the board was originally created to bring a family together. In that sense, there are no true rivals in the game. If one player reaches the finish, everyone wins. The earlier challenges described on the original cards were shaped to stimulate the player's imagination. In this case, the children's. For example, the mischievous monkeys who drive cars and motorcycles, cause chaos, and wreck everything around them. That was purely a product of Peter's imagination. In the boy's mind, that's how monkeys behave, and so his imagination shaped their appearance in the real world. As you've probably realized, no such species exists in the wild, which is why they look like something halfway between a chimpanzee and a capuchin. That's exactly how Peter pictured the monkeys in his mind. And this principle applies to all of the challenges, including the hunter, Van Pelt. Samuel Parrish was a very strict father, constantly displeased with Alan's behavior. In his eyes, Alan should have already been capable of solving his own problems at that age, instead of running away from them.
If you're afraid of something, you've got to stand and face it.
Parrish Sr. believed his son lacked courage, and that sending him to Cliffside School for Boys would help fix that. And that is exactly what we see embodied in the hunter Van Pelt.
Come back and face me like a man!
The reason lies in Alan's own imagination. The game brings the player's fears to life. Jumanji's purpose is to teach, to give its players experience and knowledge. Like every game, it has a goal. And even though the board came to life under tragic circumstances, its core purpose has always been to bring a family together. I think it's time we moved on to the two most important questions. Can the board be destroyed? And is it possible to die while playing Jumanji? As we've already mentioned, Caleb and Benjamin Sproul once tried to destroy the game, but failed. The reason is that the heart of Jumanji is the Nyamakora stone, an ancient artifact with magical power that contains the souls of people. That's why Jumanji can't be destroyed by any physical means. It would require magic. However, that doesn't mean the board is completely invulnerable. If the game is in progress, no matter what you do, the board won't even get a scratch. But once the game is over and the players have won, the board can in fact be destroyed. It can only be done in the same place and by the same means through which it was created. Jumanji was born in Africa, in fire. Therefore, the only way to truly destroy it is to burn it in a fire at the exact spot where the game first gained its magical power. The next important question is it possible to die while playing Jumanji? To find the answer, we need to look at the history of the film's creation and the sequel that was planned but never made. The screenplay for Jumanji was written by Jonathan Hensley. The story was inspired by the 1981 children's picture book by Chris Van Allsburg. From the very start of working on the script, Hensley wanted to build the entire story around a set of defined rules. He wrote out the key laws of the game. The first rule stated, only children can play. You might think of Alan and Sarah and say, but they were adults. It's important to remember that Alan and Sarah started the game as children, and in 1995, they were merely continuing what they had begun. That's why the adults in the story never believed Sarah. When she told people that the board had sucked Alan inside, she tried several times to prove she was telling the truth, Police officers and detectives even examined Jumanji and tried to play it themselves, but since they were adults, the game refused to show any of its magical powers. To an ordinary adult, Jumanji remained just a simple board game. That's exactly why psychiatrists tried to convince Sarah that Alan's disappearance was only a product of her imagination.
Alan, I spent over 2,000 hours in therapy convincing myself that it doesn't exist. See, what happened to you was so awful. I made up that whole
Sarah,
thing
it
about
was
you
awful.
turning into
It
this
was
awful
awful.
person.
It was awful.
The second rule: you cannot die while playing Jumanji. Yes, as strange as that may sound, Jumanji is first and foremost still a game. On the other hand, this rule also explains how Alan managed to survive in the jungle. A young, frightened boy, alone in the wild, without food, water, or any survival skills, wouldn't have lasted even a month. But according to Jumanji's own rules, he couldn't die. It also raises a logical question. How would Alan have been able to return to the real world if he had died there? What if one of the other players, say Peter, rolled a 5 or an 8 to bring Alan back? It wouldn't have worked if Alan were already dead. And you've probably noticed something else. The supposedly deadly mosquitoes weren't as lethal as the game described them to be. 56 residents of the town of Brantford were attacked by the mosquitoes, but not a single person died. Yes, people suffered from fever, sickness, and other painful symptoms, but none of them lost their lives. The same goes for Judy after she was struck by the poisonous plant's thorns. Didn't Alan warn that she should have died immediately? Of course, we don't know exactly what happened to her, but it's clear she didn't die. Everyone who starts the game is protected. They cannot die while playing. This is one of the 4 main rules of Jumanji. The third rule deals with the consequences of cheating or breaking the rules of the game. Anyone who tries to cheat will be punished immediately. They will begin to gradually transform into the animal represented by their game piece. That's why Peter started turning into a monkey, because his token was a monkey. If he had played as the elephant, he would have started growing a trunk. For example, Alan's piece was the rhinoceros. If he had tried to cheat, he would have begun transforming into a rhino. In addition to that, any rule breaker is instantly sent back to their starting space and forced to restart their turn. This way, Jumanji not only eliminates any possibility of cheating, but also punishes the offender for trying. The fourth rule: when a player's piece reaches the finish line, they must say just one word: Jumanji. At that moment, the game doesn't merely end. It rewinds time back to the very day it was first started. It's like a reset to the starting point, the moment of the first roll. This means it doesn't matter who makes the final move. The outcome is always tied to the person who began the game. That's why Alan would have returned to his childhood no matter what, even if Judy or Peter had been the first to reach the finish. It was this rule that led to the film's ending being changed. Director Joe Johnston didn't like the idea of the children forgetting about the game entirely. In his original vision, Judy and Peter were supposed to receive a gift from Alan at the end, a box of sneakers called Jumanji. By saying the word out loud, the children would have remembered everything they had experienced. However, screenwriter Jonathan Hensley insisted on removing that scene. He explained that such a twist would violate the game's main law. Its rules cannot be bent or broken. In the end, the version we saw in the film was the one where Judy and Peter remember nothing about their time in Jumanji. Of course, there are a few more rules. Things like taking turns properly, rolling again if you get a double, and so on. All of these established laws of the game were part of the reason why, in 2015, Sony Pictures Entertainment cancelled a planned prequel to the original Jumanji and decided instead to completely rethink the concept of the franchise. As a result, we got Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. But what few people know is that at the very start of production, the studio had planned an actual prequel. There was even a draft script written that explored how the game was created, how it gained its magical powers, and how it eventually made its way to America. The entire story centered on the Sproul family, with Caleb and Benjamin ultimately managing to win this difficult battle. The movie would have ended by tying directly into the beginning of the 1995 film, essentially becoming a full-fledged prequel. However, before production began, the studio decided to send the draft to Jonathan Hensley for his feedback and approval. The screenwriter was deeply disappointed. He said it felt as though the future creators of the film hadn't even watched the original because they broke several of the fundamental rules. For example, in the prequel, adults could hear the drums, and Robert and Michael were shown dying while playing Jumanji, among other mistakes. In the end, all of this led the studio to completely reboot the project, releasing the version where the board game is replaced by a video game console. But in truth, the story didn't end there. In 2021, a group of enthusiasts finally brought the prequel idea to life, creating a fan-made film called Jumanji, the first game, a fan version of the original movie's backstory. Because of all this confusion, the true essence of Jumanji became heavily distorted, and the original vision of the story was lost. Still, director Joe Johnston left behind many fascinating details that can be noticed if you look closely. For example, the board itself was designed with a curious flaw. The different playing pieces require a different number of steps to reach the finish line. The rhinoceros needs 31 moves to reach the Golden City, while the elephant needs 33. At first glance, it might look like a simple mistake, but as Johnston himself pointed out, it was intentional. The idea behind Jumanji was that it was originally created as a children's game. Its creators envisioned children playing together with their parents, so certain advantages were built in for the younger players. Their path to the finish was shorter, while the adults had to take a longer route. This imbalance in the board's design remained even after Jumanji gained its magical powers. In other words, even in 1995, the filmmakers already knew the brief backstory of the board itself because screenwriter Jonathan Hensley had carefully developed the foundation on which the main story of the movie was built. What can I say? Back then, they truly knew how to make a good film. It's been 30 years, and the movie still holds up surprisingly well. It's a real shame that the sequels chose to stray so far from the original idea, but perhaps some of you enjoyed all the Jumanji movies. I'll be waiting to hear your thoughts in the comments.